There is nowhere I haven't been but here, in this field, a body length from the ragged brink that gives way to forest. I collapsed here, the thin, hard slip of me whittled at both ends. I want badly to brave this aloneness now as the hoofbeats swell like a whip welt around me, but I cannot. I weep for you. Clutch the hogweed, imagine it your wrist. Likewise, the stalks refuse to bend, even slightly, inside my balmy grass. Oh, my saving grace, my heart's rest harrow. Mere thought of you dams the plows that would have my head. When you arrive to pull me up from the mud, the salt will crumble from my eyes that for nights have seen nothing save that cardinal north from which the stars beckon, those stars that, like you, never fade from sight, even in the day blue sky. Then for weeks, unspeaking, will follow their call, afraid to make more sound than does a mothling upon her first and final embrace with the open flame for which she confuses caged light. Such silence will we keep that I'll believe it is the river who thanks me for our crossing, and not you, for waiting for me. You'll whisper, as if I have done you a kindness, as if my life is not one that began only when we met, as if I had not been dead and waiting for you before. So this next poem, like I said, it takes place in the swamp, and I'll talk a little bit about the history of the swamp because very cool place with a pretty cool name. Has anyone heard of the Great Dismal Swamp? Yes, right. Okay, so it's in southeastern Virginia, northeastern North Carolina. It is a swamp, and it is named such because it is very vast and also very dismal. There are like face-eating bugs. There used to be jaguars. I feel like there's maybe one left. You know, things have changed a lot, and bears and all sorts of things in this swamp. So it is right, very dismal. And also, though, the dismalness of it was protective. A lot of folks who were enslaved escaped into the swamp, and rather than going all the way up north above the Mason-Dixon, they stayed there because they knew that the slave catchers would not go into the swamp because it was so dismal, right? And so it's this kind of ironic, paradoxical heaven, hell, right? So in this poem, we learn about Moses Grandy, and he is a man for whom the road to my grandmother's house is named, and that's all I knew until I Googled him. And then I found his own slave narrative, and I actually learned that he is the man who carved out the Dismal Swamp in a single boat in a canal and made it this place for commerce and trade, right, so that ships can pass through. So he's Captain Moses Grandy. There are a couple epigraphs that speak to that, and in this poem, the Great Dismal Swamp is speaking, and has written a love letter to Moses Grandy for all the years that they spent together, just him in the swamp in his boat. So the first epigraph reads, "It was the dense, tangled hostility of the Great Dismal Swamp and its enormous size that enabled hundreds and perhaps thousands of escaped slaves to live here in freedom." And that's from Smithsonian Magazine 2016. And then the second, "Here among snakes, bears, and panthers, I felt to myself so light that I almost thought I could fly. I then thought I would not have left the place to go to heaven." And that's Captain Moses Grandy in his own words in 1843. And so the poem is called Dear Moses Grandy, Love the Great Dismal Swamp. I send men swarms of insects in the shape of your ghost. They are not wrong to think me haunted. Possessed as I am by spirits exhumed from bodies left strewn in my wake, I trick them into thinking me God. But to them I am Eden, wicked paradise of poison, fruit, and beasts. I steep sweat from acrid flesh, sip it in pinpricks with the tongues of jewel-toned bees. I spill their blood in your name. When it seeps into my mirth, I turn a rich maroon the hue, and I remember you fondly, longing for nights when there was nothing but you and me, twilight's ichor and wind quivering in my reeds, a southern serenade. I hope you knew I heard the song of your silence, your heartbeat camouflaged in the throbbing pulse of mine. Now, they smelt molten asphalt into my arteries, litter the air with my ashes. I watch myself burn and search for your face flames. I knew you then as amalgam of marsh and man, sometimes just tar-black beads sunk into star-white glow, your eyes glinting in the glass of my stillness. Under the cover of dusk, you snuck nips of raw honeysuckle, loved saw-shorn juniper trunks through my mud. Like your namesake, you made many waters from my one, and like the Red Sea I opened, bared my soul to your people and closed to your tormentors. I cherish the sacred pleasure of being parted by your hands. I ache for the long ago days when your vessel's crest gently unzipped my quiet mire, like the waning sun ripples liquid along the horizon's serrated blade. You told me then that you would not have left me for heaven itself. So I dragged them through the hell they wanted me to be for you. I'm kind of a vibe poet. I don't really usually pick poems before I read. I kind of go off of where I am and feeling in the room is. This next one, I think I'll read here because, like I said, I've been staying with Elisa and Chris, and I've already had so many stunning encounters with nature. I was able to hike up the brook on their property to this waterfall at the end of it. It was incredible, and I just sat there for 20 minutes with my feet in the water, just admiring the majesty and feeling so small and also so singular. Like every bug and minnow has its own life, as do we, right? And so this poem kind of then thinks really about nature, about the histories of it, what all of the things in it might mean to various people, and it also just kind of takes note, does a lot of noticing. And so this is anti-pastoral, this green and pleasant land. I have no wonder left for petrichor, no heart to marvel at osmanthus sumac. My eye idles in the grass of your sprawling countryscapes glazed with matte patina. In your pristine pastoral, God lords above a lee of moaning cattle. If men walk here, none notice the irony of painting, if his painting, the cows both black and white at once. But I am meant to swoon at the sight of water lilies, of quail pecking blueberries the same way boar revel in the lush throat of a kill. Never mind the fireflies that have all but gone. Never mind who once blistered on this green and pleasant land. There's nothing you can tell me about beauty, about what glory languishes untended, blooming muteness despite all morass and blur. So if I must admire the magpies, their morbid halo, you will look first, unflinching, at what festers in the brush, the saltating maggots, the feasting butterflies, their dripping wings. Let me save enough time to read some other poems. Okay, so a lot of the work that I do is ekphrastic. Who knows what that means? I'm a teacher. We're gonna do some hand raising here tonight. Oh, I got one. Okay, awesome. So ekphrasis is basically art in response to another kind of art, right? So it can be a poem in response to a painting, which is what this poem is, but it also can be a song in response to a sculpture, right? So it's really encouraging that kind of conversation between the two mediums, which I love. So this poem was inspired by a painting by Jennifer Packer. Don't want to mess up the title. Yes, okay. The painting was called Say Her Name, if anyone remembers that movement. And so it was done in 2017, around the time of Sandra Bland's killing. And the form itself is a riff on a form by Terence Hayes, who's another poet. It's called A Golden Shovel. Um, Everybody knows what this is, right? Do you remember in school when you had to do an across-stitch poem and you were like, A for awesome, R, I'm really cool, I am amazing, right? That's the concept of A Golden Shovel, except it takes Gwendolyn Brooks's "We Real Cool" as that spine, right, where your name would be. So I've played with that form a little bit. I've made it diagonal. You can kind of see the shape of it here, right? So it goes through, kind of shaped like a leaf, because the painting is one of a vase of leaves. And the poem is called Still Life with Bouquet, Golden Spade Out of Frame. And it also has an epigraph, because I just love to give details before I do. And the epigraph reads, I paint flowers so they will not die. Read a column. We be bouquets, be green, leaves ethereal, be wild weeds, be lamb's clover, be day flowers, cool blue, be hue busting up bleak blurk. We evening primrose, morning glory, and larkspur left bent like sunlight through hickory shagbark, schooled in all the ways of soil, the ways of low dirt. We, the garden, and the golden spade used to till. We, the tiny lurking mantis, veiled in verdure, praying under blade. Lately, it seems all there is to do is wait, and wait we will. We outwill winter, bide out the gnaw of blight strikes, we outroot the storm's walled eye, our spine stems straight, sepals unsnapped, petals parted but unshed. We, hardy anthurium, philodendron, monstera, we sing silky with cordiform tongues, sweat and rosin, we bleed, we blood. We be bloodied as thorns, we be blushed as trumpet lily, damask rose, things of beauty. We the bowl survive the gin. We the clouds in our own sky, the birds too. We be dandelion, be red jasmine, be jazz. We flush just once, like sweet 4 o'clock in June. Buds unfist for a 4 days bloom, we hear sorry swoons. How lovely, how quick they die so soon. Okay, this next poem, a lot of my inspiration for poems comes from history, right? But a few of the poems in this collection are contemporary and are inspired by real life events. I've even written a poem or two based off of a TikTok. So I get it from everywhere. I'll tell you the story of this poem and then I'll begin. So Still Life with Tulip as Grenade is about a March 2021 incident covered in the Herald Sun by Virginia Bridges. And the headline for the incident read, North Carolina sends 6-year-olds to court. Why some say it's time for change. So in the story, we learn about a 6-year-old Black boy in Durham, North Carolina, who was arrested and charged with damage to real property for picking a tulip out of a woman's yard as he waited for the school bus. And he was so little in the story, it says, that he couldn't even see over the table in the courtroom. And so his lawyer, because his mother wasn't there, gave him a coloring book and some crayons to occupy him while the court proceedings were going on. Of course, he didn't understand. So this poem is for him and all the little Black boys. Still Life with Tulip as Grenade. Each tulip petal is blanketed by its own personal imposter. A doppelganger sepal giving its finest impression of bloom. Aramuris, Phalaenopsis, hellebore, all haloed at the base by wreaths of colorful leaves. And we ourselves are not above playing at majesty when it suits us, when it can be slipped smoothly out of like a dagger from a too loose sheath. Now let the scene drain to reside. A wrought iron bench, a dull pair of pupils leering through a Queen Anne's lace chalet, the once arabesque garden, now more pastiche of peeling stones suspended, the tulips still longing to know the blushed petal of a rabbit's tongue, the sound embrace of sinew. The boy in monochrome and altered hue, but black all the same. His hand cradling a single gray head, a grenade with only whistle, where the pin of green stem used to be. Let's say we're grateful that gunmetal black tulips are rare, that the powder emptied from pistols onto his skin was only pollen. But no, let's not say thank you. We can exhale this snatched gasp, corroding our lungs without pretending it's anything more than sick relief. Think now of the boy in the courtroom, seated at a table his eyes have not yet grown to meet, coloring in the scene once more. His fingers, dirt brown, raking back and forth across the page. Think of the flowers left in the ground, feigning dead silence, wondering what to do about the imagined problem of Black boys who find beauty in all the wrong places. Two more from this collection, and then I'll read some notes. This is the last love poem in the Blackfield. This, date stamp epigraph reads, "The burning streets of America, 1920. And what, my love, but the pasture? But the blades refusing to brown beneath this wintered march. What else in this world can still call itself living? Teach me how to consider the leaves, all they are because of all they are despite, how you delight in their opening. A glacial flick, like a snake's split tongue. I want, like you, not to seek the beast in every bud, to see a field of men as yet a field, black though it may be, but here I am, the wilt of the meadow. My young body already yellow with bitter spots. Show me what is untouched by the godless blue, what here was sown with any sense of grace. As we scrape raw our throats, crack our fists against this stealing air, the tear gas like crane flies, ambling around dim porch lights, drifts lower. My flesh begs. What else but this suffering has made me worthy of your hands? As you turn my tears to milk, calm my lungs with purple aster, as you wait till the remedy turns sweet enough to kiss from my lips, your breath answers. We are weed and flower both. Reminds me how we were soft once in his grasp, before the plow split our napes, before these iron barbs took root, and I'm sure now of my ugliness, and sure that I love you because you don't try to make me unknow this truth. The sirens, the boots, they stampede on, but we alive because of, we alive despite. Yes. So this is the last poem in the collection. It was inspired by a word from the Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, which is literally poet bait. I mean, come on, that's so dramatic. That's so very inspiring. So the word is anemoia. It's a noun, and it means nostalgia for a time you've never known. I'm sure we've all felt that, right? I'm sure we feel that a lot lately. Yeah. So the poem is called Sweetfield Anemoia. There was, at one time, an empty field. I'm sure of it. Or was it a forest so jade that a vine snake's darting left only glare like light breaking over rolling grain? No. I know there was a field because I miss it. Its brush languid as a forest slinking into jaded slumber, dragging floor dwellers at its outskirts like a tool train, the land trodden by what once bent its grasses with breath. God, what we could do without yesterday. Its forested jaundice, its sepia fog, with a prologue we ourselves sowed, a terrain thick with memory of unbodied lush, florid, a forest of stalks. Weeping, it shone like jade in the easy sun. Yes, there was warmth, sugarcane, a sweetness, or even just its thick simula. It whispered like sound in an adjacent forest, an aria unflattened by my failure to prove it real. Believe me, I'm sane, I swear. I remember the pasture, the soft sickle of a new leaf. Each shoot its own forest with only jaybirds and lacebugs coming between stems and their rain. Listen, I know this field. It never held a soul. No tree bark backs, no forest of bowed limbs, no blue jaws, no ambered over sores. Only green thoughts, only the mundane. So the interesting thing about having a book out in the world and the whole process of that is that by the time you are reading poems from the book, you are largely a different person and writer than you were when you wrote them. And that's very true for me. The vast majority of this book was written in 2020 and 2021. And so my sensibilities have shifted. Who I am as a person has shifted. And so my poetry in some ways have shifted as well. And so these new poems are kind of exploring that, just exploring my wandering through a new kind of world poetically. And so I took the form of meditation, right? So they're prose poems and they just kind of think about the world that I live in, the way that that world shaped me, the world before me. And so there are a few maybe nature metaphors in there. I doubt that I write a poem without one, but largely they're just really me noticing and wondering. So this is meditation on the nature of risk and its machines. Of a gambling addiction, an optimist might muse, what a beautiful thing to have so much hope. Hope fills the dozens of slot machines I pass in the Vegas airport. Hope fills the pockets and purses of the laying over and laying off. Temptation says press a button and wait for a colorful response. The waiting addictive in its own right, a tightening of fashion slivers. Ever the pessimist. I ogle the neon displays, their dancing pixels, but keep my money to myself. What of our agency remains that awake, ever alert, and what of us remains to be awoken, bear-like, post-hibernation and rumbling inside, by some intrinsic need for result? Win or lose, no discomfort of in-between. I chastise myself for succumbing to such binary thinking and leaving nothing to gray. I want to remember what my mind was like before logic beat out hope, or at least belief in beginner's luck. I watch all of the sports, but I have never placed a single bet. I don't keep liquor in my fridge because my mother never drank because her father did. My mother won't let my father keep his gun in the house. His father survived war, survived Jim Crow, only to succumb to a sponge in the gut, left there from a routine surgery. Low risk, they were told. Such distance between what risk our instincts would have us refuse and what the world tells us we must do to survive. Between what is and isn't worth leaving to chance, or worse, temptation. One of my grandmothers survived my grandfather, only in the 5th attempt to flee. Another survived her daughter's grandfather, but even now at 80, refuses the risk of daytime slumber. My brother, when we were children, refused to sleep at anyone else's house. Somehow, we all inherently know that to rest in the light is to show one's belly to the shadows, their blinking eyes. A then friend texts, I swear, I'm like, what is not trauma informed? And recently, life has led me to believe that we are all shaped by little more than the ways the world wounds us. All the scars we have from pulling that lever and coming up matchless, light-palmed, jaded. What a beautiful thing to have so much hope. What ugliness, I think, hope must survive before we decide to place another chip on its black. What's one of them? This is another meditation. This one is more explicitly nature-based. Meditation on the nature of the bear and its reflection. On a lit screen, I see a bear see itself in a mirror a human has placed in his woods. He lunges at his enemy being himself, doesn't flinch. Over the phone, they tell my father, an ex-Navy sniper, they may need him to shoot a bear that escaped the Great Dismal Swamp. Never mind the question of how a wild creature, which is to say any creature, might escape from his own home. My father understands, seeing himself as a man capable of shooting a bear. They see him that way too, the men who come calling. But until that call came, having seen my father most of my life to that point on a half-lit screen, half a world away from my home, I hadn't known him as capable of shooting anything at all. In a way, my father still sees himself as a soldier, a part of himself he has left behind but never quite escaped. I wonder why we see the bear being outside its natural habitat as escaping, rather than fighting at all costs against being left behind. On another day's screen, I see another bear, this one at home in the woods, but listless, going and going in circles. He had lived his whole life to that point caged in a zoo. So even after he was returned home, he still did only what he knew, took up only as much space as he'd always thought he'd ever have. My father never admits to being lost. A former cab driver, he'll go in circles until he finds his way. The whole world around about, the right exit waiting just around the next bend. When we call to ask of his whereabouts, he is often on the road, and if he is on the road, he is almost always almost home. Long before I left my first home, my father taught me how to pack a suitcase, to make clothes take up less space, military style. Now retired, he still rolls his socks ankles down around each other before putting them away, military style. He recounts how they slept in the barracks, knows a thin mattress and latticed of sea salt rust coils away from another soldier's back. Soldier atop soldier atop soldier, even at rest, taking up as little space as humanly possible, military style. My father's father was a soldier. He took photographs overseas, where soldiers slept in barracks and set bear traps. Did several tours, deployed, then home, going in circles. Struggled to tell his own reflection from what he saw of himself in his beloved, his cubs, and so lunged at his enemy, his reflection. Lunged and circled. Returned more and more bearish each time around his own cage, his own roundabout, his own home. Being eventually nothing more than himself, he didn't flinch. Right, one more. And a note of beauty, as I like to, in a little more of an upbeat note. This poem was just inspired by something that I say a lot, which is, oh, this reminds me of, oh, that reminds me of, you remind me of. And the way that people sometimes take it is negatively. If I say, oh, you remind me of this person. But I wanted to write a poem that expressed what I really mean when I say that. On resemblance. And thank you all again. I've noticed people tend to take you remind me of regrettably as you look like. When I really mean to express something more like, I found this being beautiful in a way that reminded me immediately only of you. Your beauty so singular in my mind that even my numbed subconscious alights, my undermined having lived an entire quiet life separate from my knowing mind, but never losing hope because somewhere in its own field of view you bloom also and again. And so searching for you like a hummingbird searches for an anther that first awakened its need for a sustaining sweetness. They are the closest I've come, I mean to say, to a kind of loveliness that I, upon first sight of you, was changed by, charged evermore with the pursuit of. In saying you remind me of, I offer a failure of my looking, yes, perhaps, but I also offer you a sweetness, sustained only by this knowing of you, your impossible blooming against the winds of passing time, winds that sweep low across a mind, my mind, doomed to forget more than it could ever bear to remember, more than it could ever be reminded of. Thank you. Now, Q&A. Questions? I don't really know, but that's Allison.
This is actually more of a observation, but I loved everything you read, but I'm just enthralled by your meditations. And I know that I think for me that what kind of evaporates is the notion that this is craft. It just feels so deep and authentic, and certain all the poems are, but there's something about the appearance of it's not a an imperative or traditional form. And I'm imagining them very horizontal this way, okay,
Yeah.
as opposed to I'm being propelled down to a conclusion.
Yeah.
And I feel as though they're inconclusive, which I love, and I love the mystery of that. And I love that they're so generational, and so the poem about the bear and the book, it just blows me away. I just absolutely love your voice in these. So it's just more a note of appreciation, and also I just can't wait to see what you keep writing along in the meditations. And I'm not sure that that's a freedom we always give ourselves, because one thing kind of leads to another, and we understand how deeply and richly we're composed, right? We're formed by so many things. And I'm wondering if, since you've been at your residency at Glen Hollow, if this is what you're working on or a new direction. Can you tell us a little bit about what this residency is giving you space for?
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you so much. It's really gratifying, especially to hear you say that these felt less directed by craft. Just because I think this book is so formal, right? There's so much going on with craft, and it's because it's kind of like, when an artist puts out their first album, and I mean, they're doing all their tricks on the tracks, they're doing every run and like every riff. That's what this was, because I was just so excited to learn everything, right? But the meditations are a lot more pared back and a lot more raw. They come from that raw place, and they're also a lot more about me and my experiences, right? And so that was really that kind of a major shift. And it also happened during a time when I was in school to learn about craft theoretically. So it was really kind of a fraught time, interior wise for me in poetry. So I'm grateful that they came out the way that they did and have landed. Um, what I'm doing now, I think I'm going to write more meditations. I honestly did come here with an idea of specific histories that I wanted to write about, and really kind of dive into. However, that's not what's moving me to the page right now. And I'm just trying to listen to that continually and not force anything, especially while I still have these poems that apparently people still want to hear me read. So I don't feel like I have to have a kind of constructed next thing. So I am just doing meditations. Yesterday it just occurred to me, I just oftentimes in my process, I literally just write a line that occurs to me when I'm walking, living, whatever, and then I'll go back to my line bank, like a word bank, and I'll, pull a line. Be like, okay, I'll sit down and try a poem. And I said of walking to the waterfall yesterday, and so I'm just walking and a little robin like pops out of the bush. And I had just spent time thinking about nature and how many of us there are underneath everything there is. And so you see a robin and your first thought is, oh, that's a common bird. It's a cute bird, but it's a common bird. But then I thought, but there's so many robins and that one has its own singular life. And then I thought, well, if that robin has its own singular life, I hope that that bird knows love. And then, just as I'm thinking that, who I think was his partner, Robin, appeared from the trees and they start like flying together. And this stuff just happens to me. So clearly it was meant for me to be a poet because stuff like that just happens to me where I'm looking at a bird and thinking, I hope you know love, and another bird appears and they fly together. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about right now in my poetry, just a lot of observing and meditation on where my feet are in that moment and what I'm seeing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
When did you start writing poetry?
That's a good question. I have poems that I wrote when I was like 6 years old. I've always loved it. I have journals, my teacher in school used to write prompts on the board. You could write a story or anything. And they're mostly about like princesses and snowflakes and stuff that like little 6-year-old girls would like. And I continue to have poems that I wrote in middle school that were a little more developed. But in terms of taking poetry seriously, in terms of this avenue of things, I frankly didn't know it existed. Nobody tells you you can be a poet when you grow up. And this is coming from the person who, like, when they would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I would say a dolphin trainer in all seriousness. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to be doing the tricks. Okay. And so, it's been really amazing and surreal for me to come into living a life that I didn't know existed. And I didn't really start taking writing poetry seriously until about 5 years ago, because that was the pandemic. I was living in London. I was in grad school and I was studying poetic theory, but I was thinking more that I would be a scholar. And then COVID happened. I was shunted back to Hampton Roads, Virginia, and it was the most natural place that I had been, my home, in years. I had lived in Atlanta and then I had lived in London, and they have a lot of green spaces, both of those cities, but I live in the woods like this. Like this is where I'm from. This is home to me. And so it just all came alive again with all this new experience and new knowledge of having been to school. And so that's when I started taking poetry seriously. That's when I wrote this.
Just a comment. Don't you find listening to poems versus reading them is much more moving?
Oh yeah.
My grandfather was a poet, and just fooling around with the poem one time, I found one of his best known poems, somebody reading it, and it made me appreciate his work more. And just listening, I think, get more out of it than reading.
I 100% agree. I think that poetry, and I mean, we can look at history to understand that poetry is an art that is clearly descended from histories of oral storytelling. It has a lot of roots in the part of the world that we understand as Morocco right now. They have beautiful poetry culture, and that's some of the oldest of it. And then in my culture, of course, we had griots, right? That the Southern storytellers that passed these things down, right? And because we were not allowed to read and write, poetry was largely a spoken practice. And so absolutely poetry is an art to me that is meant to be experienced and read aloud. And so yeah, I'm very grateful for opportunities when I get to engage with it this way and get to bring life to it. Hopefully for the next book, I'll get to do an audiobook. I would love that. I would love to, have people be able to experience it that way without necessarily just stumbling upon a reading in the middle of the forest in the field. Thank you.
No question.
Okay.
Oh, no, I'm correct in saying this or not. I think that to me, there's a real similarity between music, lyrics and poetry. And I was wondering if you've ever dabbled or had any, done any work with musicians.
I would love to. I haven't directly, but one of the coolest things that happened to me since having this collection is a composer, a classically trained composer, took one of the poems, I didn't read it, but it's on Mars in this collection, and wrote a whole 3-piece composition to it. So it was a piano, a viola, and a soprano singer. And they performed this in 4 seasons. I didn't get to see the performance live, but I did get to see the video of it at least. And so it was, yeah, it was incredible, and it brought the work to life. And I'd never thought about it as anything resembling song lyrics until that moment. But I loved it. I wouldn't say super musically inclined, but I do love music, and I certainly do think that poetry has specific musics, specific repetitions of sound, right? Specific kind of rhythms of it, undercurrent that make it like music. So yeah, I would love to work with a songwriter or like somebody who would actually write the melody, but they'd have to do that. I don't have
Sure.
that power. Thank you.
I have a question. So you studied screenwriting as well. I wonder if you find writing poetry or writing scripts, if they inform one another at all, or yeah, what's your process with that?
That's a great question, because they absolutely do inform each other, because they are both highly, highly visual mediums, right? Poetry is all about the image, all about the detail. And as much as we don't necessarily think always about the script of a film or a television series, the #1 rule of writing a script is that if it cannot be visually depicted, you can't include it in the script. So you can't have a character or basically a slug, right, which is just a line that describes the action of a character. You can't say in that slug, he pondered, the thought of the raindrops, blah, blah, because on screen it's gonna look like this. Right, and so you have to really be able to visually describe, okay, he walked over to the window, his nose just barely touching the pane, the glass is fogging up a little bit, right? So it has to be on that level of image detail, and so that's absolutely for me where the two like most overlap. It's a great question. Thank you.
I would love to know some of your favorite poets and poetesses.
Oh yeah, how much time we have?
Yeah, right.
So I say always that my North Star of poetry is Gwendolyn Brooks. I'm inspired by her so much. My favorite poem is her kitchenette building, which just describes a very, it's just a mundane day in the building that they lived in. It's a duplex, so there's like 1 million people in this building fighting to get in the bathroom, and it references Langston Hughes' idea of a dream deferred, but it's also just the mundane, the everyday, the kind of Black life that I know and love. So she's North Star. Contemporary poets, I love Bybee Francis. I love, she's a genius. I love Mary Oliver. Because I just actually was last week reading at the Library of Congress in honor of her, which is not a dream. And just the way that she is able to maintain a sense of wonder and appreciation for every blade of grass and every single line in her poems is something that absolutely inspires me. I love Frank Woodard. Because I love how he kind of writes history into the page, right? And always, really has an ear to the past as much as an ear to the future. That's what I'm trying to do. So honestly, I call myself a thief when it comes to poetry, right? I am reading other people and I'm looking at what are you doing that I love, and how can I steal that and recreate it in my poems. And so those are some of my favorite folks that I have absolutely stolen from. Thank you. All right.
I think that might be a great place for us to stop. Let's all give us another round of applause.